Hey, I'm gonna keep it a buck with y'all too. I actually put information on a PowerPoint slide. Like, yeah, I want to make sure I can get this information to y'all in a way that's palatable. So I actually put it on a PowerPoint slide. So, hey, don't ever say the DFD didn't take his time to try to put this thing together. All right, this very first charge right here, honest services fraud. And I saw that and I was like, what the fuck is honest services fraud? Like, yeah, I've been in this game for a minute and I was like, honest services fraud? What the hell is this? And it hit me when I was doing some research and I looked at former Mayor Ray Nagin down in New Orleans, honest services fraud. So we got some highlights here and I kind of highlighted it because I'm going to show you shortly how we break these statutes out, because these statutes are just written in a whole bunch of just a bunch of group of things together, a bunch of words and phrases, and some things are and meaning you need both, some things or meaning you need either or to satisfy a particular element. Long story short, what happens when an attorney looks at any criminal statute, they're going to look at that statute and then they want to break it out in elements. For example, for any legal criminal charge or civil charge, each charge has a certain amount of elements. All we do is read the statute and then we break it out. This statute says all of this, but what do I need to prove that a person is guilty of this or that a person is liable of this? So let's pull up the big screen on this so we can see what the hell honest services fraud actually is. And again, I had no clue what the hell it was. But honest services fraud, a scheme to defraud another of the intangible right to honest services through a scheme to violate a fiduciary duty by bribery or kickbacks. And they got a fiduciary duty as a duty to act only on the behalf of the public, an employer, shareholder, union, politician. So this is a really interesting charge because a person can only be charged with this if they have a fiduciary duty. So me, if I were proclaiming to be the world's greatest investor and I defraud you out of your money, I can be guilty of a lot of things, but I couldn't be guilty of honest services fraud because I'm just proclaiming myself to be the world's greatest investor. I'm actually not a certified person who's certified, licensed to invest in securities and those type of assets. So I can never have a fiduciary obligation where I have to work in your best interest. So this normally applies to professionals. So who can do this? Attorneys, physicians, certified public accountants, politicians. This is where you'll see this particular charge. This is actually an interesting charge because, like I said, I'll be honest, I never heard of honest services fraud a day in my life. I was like, what the fuck is honest services fraud? But this was one of the charges that the former New Orleans Mayor Ray Nagin was in fact charged with. Let me go ahead and get through. Hey, I appreciate y'all shouting out the everything and trying to get these likes up. I myself think that I'm done waiting on the feds. Illinois should have gotten on Henyard first, but Delgado Law Firm has put has a lot of pull with the Attorney General, therefore the governor. Yeah, it is. It does appear to be a little bit of a good old boy network. Delgado represents Tiffany, but build the village of Dalton. Does this apply to not giving businesses licenses without being a kickback? Tiff has done a whole lot of that. You know what, Paul? Hey, Paul, you might be co-counsel for tonight. Paul, you might be co-counsel for tonight because we're gonna actually save that one for. We're gonna save that one for last. We're gonna scroll down to one that I think everybody is a little bit aware of, and it's a lot easier. We talked about it on the channel before. Good old-fashioned conspiracy. Good old-fashioned conspiracy. And we talked about this before. The elements are easy, but it is a person who attempts or conspires to commit any offense under this chapter shall be subject to the same penalties as those prescribed for the offense, the commission of which was the object of the attempt or conspiracy. It is a long, convoluted definition, of conspiracy. The long story short is, in order for there to be a conspiracy, there has to be more than one person. You can't really conspire by yourself unless you got like split personalities. But there has to be multiple persons involved, and we talked about this before. There has to be a substantial act in the furtherance of the crime. What does that mean? The example that I gave before is normally the same as the law school example. If me and two other people sat down in the basement and we just drinking and having a good old time, and we talked about robbing the bank. Up until that point, no conspiracy has been made. We can sit down, we can meet about some stuff, we could talk about it and just we could kind of talk through a proposed blueprint of what we would do, but there has to be a substantial act in the furtherance of. So in that same example that we see is one thing for us to sit around talking about what we're going to do and how we would do it. But the minute we go out and get a bunch of Richard Nixon masks and some all black hoodies so that we can effectuate and carry out this actual crime, is at that point when we took that substantial step in the furtherance of that the conspiracy is actually committed. Now, the interesting thing is, and it says it here, I'm going to read this part. I'm not going to pull it up, but it says, any person who attempts or conspires to commit any offense under this chapter shall be subject to the same penalties as those prescribed for the offense. Now, essentially what that means is, hey, if me and you conspire, I go out and buy it, the offense is actually done, they're going to charge me as an accessory during the fact. There's an accessory before the fact, accessory during the fact, and accessory after the fact. And depending on what type of accessory a person is classified in, it determines what their punishment is. An accessory during the fact is always treated the same as the principal. So, I mean, think about it. That's common sense. I'm an accessory during the fact. In the bank robbery scenario that we gave, that would be, oh, let's actually flip this into a Henyard scenario. An accessory during the fact. Let's say Tiffany Henyard allegedly wants to start a nonprofit and wants to funnel money from the government, from the state and from the local government to her charity, right? Tiffany Henyard Care Foundation, as an example, hypothetically. She calls up someone else and says, yo, I want to funnel this money, but I need you as the agency head of this particular organization to sign off on this charitable donation that you're going to make to my charity. At that point, the person who signed off is an accessory during the fact because their contributions to the offense are occurring actually at the same time that the offense itself is occurring, or in close proximity to. It could be contemporaneously around the same time. But accessory before the fact, during the fact, you're going to be charged the same. After the fact, you might be charged lighter. Before the fact, after the fact, you could be charged lighter. Somebody embezzled a bunch of money and came to me and said, hey, can you hold this money for me? And I don't ask no questions and I hold it. I'm probably an accessory after fact. I'm probably going to get less time than the person who actually committed the crime. But that's just kind of the general definition of conspiracy and how it's going to play, because we talked about this before. There is no way that this level of misappropriation of funds can be done by just solely one person. I don't give a damn if Dalton, Illinois is a town of only 20,000 people and is only a small rural area. Most government systems and infrastructures have some types of checks and balances in place to where power can't be held unilaterally by one person to have exclusive control over everything. So in order for me as the mayor to misappropriate some funds, to steal something, I have to get a signature from somebody somewhere. Somebody else has to approve or sign off to something. And I think the biggest example we see this in is with the credit cards. Tiffany Henyard is adamant about not having her name on a credit card. She doesn't control money. Other people control those cards because they're the ones who make the purchases for their particular organization. That's an argument that she's made before the trustees, before the citizens for months now. And is actually a fair point. It is a good point for her to have, not to have the unilateral control. But in order for her to burn money off those cards, she has to reach out and give some type of influence for someone to actually put that payment through, for someone to sign something, for someone to authorize it in some aspect. So definitely conspiracy charge is going to be on here because there's just too many players involved. We know Keith Freeman, we know Louis Lacey. These are people who have already allegedly have been helping the government, or at least the board of trustees. The interesting thing is going to be on this conspiracy charges, especially as it relates to the township, how many people on the actual board of trustees may get implicated in indictment for conspiracy. That's going to be interesting because, from my understanding, it looks like at some point early on, she had damn near everybody on the board of trustees kind of like on her side. And I think that's a really big pivot to make for now people claiming that they're whistleblowers. So it's going to be interesting to see if any trustees get caught up on that. Let's see. The hen claims, it says the hen claims said that 4 million grant, and later on Facebook Live that she said that Thornton Township surplus at her campaign picnic yesterday doesn't make sense. I did see that where she said they had like a $4 million surplus in the Thornton Township. I would have to see some numbers of that. I mean, just everything that we've been seeing from the FOIA request to Lori Lightfoot's preliminary investigative report that she did with limited information, it all points to a bag being ran up on the backs of the taxpayers. I have not seen any proof of a grant yet. It's easier said than done. Yeah, I get it. So Tiffany just can't blame Keith Freeman for her malfeasance. She can. Other video would be what would be her top three defenses. She can. She can. You can make up any defense you want, but it's just not going to be a viable defense of ignorance because I've actually did some research and I saw a video of a Thornton Township board meeting in 2021 where Tiffany Henyard was actually asking for an independent audit to come down and take a look at the townships, conduct an internal audit of monies being associated with like the Department of Motor Vehicle and the water company because there was appeared to be some cash payments. So there's no way you can go from in 2001 when you aren't the supervisor asking for independent financial audits to be made to now that you are the supervisor, you don't know anything about the process. It just doesn't make, excuse me, any sense. Why is Lacey hiding the Tahoe at his garage? That would be stupid as hell. Well, we already know that's going to happen. Let's throw this one out as a consolation. I think this one is easy. I'm going to just pull it up real briefly. I don't even know if this is going to apply. Okay. But normally, if you're, this is going to be interesting to see how good of a schemer, a fraudster, a thief, allegedly Tiffany Henyard and her co-conspirators are. Because typically, with any good fraud scheme, there's always a tax evasion charge. Well, why would there be a tax evasion charge? Because you have an influx of cash coming in. When you have this influx of cash coming in, especially if you're putting it in your personal bank accounts, you're going to have to account for that money. So to account for that money, people tend to fudge sources of incomes. They tend to fudge how much money their businesses, their outside businesses, or their charitable organization may have paid them directly. Sometimes they'll fudge and make up fake deductions in order to kind of reduce their tax liability. So normally, when you see white collar fraud, you also see a tax evasion charge because that's that part of trying to make it seem as everything is legitimized and everything is okay. Typically, if you don't see a tax evasion charge, that means that they were just a rookie and they weren't doing their due diligence at all. A lot of companies and individuals that fraudulently receive monies will face charges for federal tax evasion as the result of their unlawful use of illegally obtained funds. Claiming deductions for expenses paid with illegal funds can lead to federal tax evasion charges. Under 20, blah, 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 the statute of federal tax evasion carries a fine of up to $100,000 for individuals or $500,000 for corporations and up to 5 years in federal imprisonment. So essentially, tax evasion is a charge that white collar criminals get from trying to defend and legitimize their ill-gotten gains. I need to make this money look legitimate. My bank account too big. I make $200,000 a year, but the shit I got in here is indicative of somebody who made $700,000 a year. How can I fudge these numbers? What can I move around to make things look legit? So most times, if you're trying to be savvy and use your head, you'll see white collar crimes, and then you'll see a tax evasion charge. With no tax evasion charge, you just probably throwing the damn money in your bank recklessly. That's how they got. That's how Kwame Kilpatrick got hit. He damn near had $1 million in a separate account. Somebody should check Tiffany's bank account. I remember when Kwame Kilpatrick got out too. He was staying in like a mansion, and a reporter asked him like, "How can you afford this place?" And he was like, his answer was either, it was something weird too. I can't remember what it is, but it wasn't an answer that you would give as somebody who had the means to actually get that place. We'll start with wire fraud. Wire fraud is always an easy one. It's one of the fun ones that we see quite often. But wire fraud is one that federal prosecutors use often. They actually overuse it. They actually overuse it. There's a few reasons for wire fraud. One, prosecutors think is an easy charge, but two, wire and mail fraud have a unique provision that allows you to kind of it allows you to get a little bit more time on the statute of limitations. Conspiracy as well. Conspiracy is one of those weird charges where it allows some manipulation with the statute of limitations for other crimes that may have been committed. Wire fraud, any fraudulent activity that involves internet communication or that is conducted in whole or in part over the internet. It can lead to wire fraud charges. Using the internet to execute any scheme or artifice to defraud or obtain money or property by means of false or fraudulent pretenses, representations, or promises carries up to a $500,000 fine and 20 years in prison. There's a lot of time for wire fraud. Long story short of wire fraud, and this is why federal prosecutors actually love wire fraud, is because it's looked at as an easy charge to get, or easy conviction to get. So let's use Henyard examples, okay? Let's say we're going to use one that was brought up earlier, where Tiffany Henyard allegedly strong armed local businesses like, yo, we won't give you a business to operate in the township or the Dalton village of Dalton or wherever. We won't give you a license to operate unless you pay $3,500 to the Tiffany Henyard Cares Foundation, right? So let's say those are the facts, right? And at some point, there were communications between Tiffany Henyard and, let's say, Keith Freeman, like, hey, did you hear back from the guys who want to get their trucking company started? Are they depositing the money or not? That very brief, short, limited conversation could potentially meet the threshold to satisfy for wire fraud because it's telecommunications. If it was sent via email, via text, if it's a fraudulent activity that occurred, yeah, the fraud was strong arming the business to donate to your charity and pretty much hijacking them for their license. Like, yo, you're not gonna get this. We're gonna get in the racketeering game, and we aren't gonna give you what you need to operate your business. So you can't make any money unless you give money to us. Using the internet to execute any scheme or to defraud. Internet, telephone, text messages, anything that digital medium is going to qualify. And that 20-year statute of limitations, I mean, that 20-year sentence is a big deal. And the other thing, too, is it's every communication that was transmitted. So if we're having a text conversation back and forth, and I send you 10 text communications on February 29th related to this fraudulent scheme we got going on, then that's 10 separate charges. That's how that's charged. It's not looked at as this is one communication. Each of those instances are a different charge of wire fraud. So it allows you to stack things up, and it really forced defendants to look at like, yo, we may have to take a plea here because these wire fraud charges are stacking up, and it's really easy for the federal government to prove because they just have to prove that there was some type of electronic communication related to the fraud. One we'll save for last because she's going to do it, but this is the one that I think we got to go into a deep dive on right here. All right, this is the biggest one. The good old RICO, racketeering, influence, and corrupt organization. Okay, because I mean, I think everybody in the chat would agree that this is conduct that required the involvement of multiple persons. I think everybody would agree that if we just assumed who we could potentially identify as co-conspirators, yeah, they would meet the classification of an organization. But I want y'all to see what I did here versus these other statutes. You see how these other statutes, I just wrote them out as is. This RICO statute was long as hell. And because this RICO statute was long as hell, this is how they teach you in law school to break the statute out. I broke it out into the elements so we can see exactly what we need in order to satisfy this. In order to find somebody guilty of a RICO charge, this is how it is. So it wasn't written like this. It was written kind of like this, all jumbled up, but it was so much stuff that I had to pull it out. Now, I do got to look up one thing. So give me 1 second. I'm going to leave that on the screen just in case y'all want to read it. And I got to pull up one more screen because I got to get the definition and I highlight it of racketeering activity. Racketeering activity. That definition long as fuck, and I'm not reading all that. Pardon my language, but we gonna get into it. All right. So racketeering is one of the ones that's juicy. Everybody like it. You want you want to beat the RICO, real estate RICO. You hear all these RICO, Young Thug, YSL RICO, which they probably beat that case because the prosecution is wild. But in order for a RICO charge to stick, is any person who received income directly or indirectly from a pattern of racketeering activity or through the collections of an unlawful debt. So you need element one. Any person has to be a person. A person is an individual, or it could be an entity. Is defined as a person legally. LLC is defined as a person in the eyes of the law. It has to be a person. They have to have received income directly or indirectly. Now, 3 and 4, I thought about writing it a little bit different, but I was like, I'm gonna keep it simple. Now, 3 and 4 is interesting because you don't need both. You need either or. So you need from a pattern of racketeering activity or through the collection of an unlawful debt. So the question is, well, what the hell is racketeering activity? I'm not even gonna pull it up because the definitions are so wild. But all right, listen to this definition of racketeering activity. It's the whole page. It's so long as shit. Racketeering activity is defined by 18 USC 1961, which provides all the definitions for everything in this RICO statute. Racketeering activity means any act or threat involving murder, kidnapping, gambling, arson, robbery, bribery, extortion, dealing in obscene manner, or dealing in a controlled substance or listed chemical, which is chargeable under state law, blah, blah, blah. Any act which is indictable under the following provisions is a whole gang of shit. I'm not even going to dive into all that. Racketeering activity, any act or threat involving murder, kidnapping, gambling, arson, robbery, bribery, or extortion. Remember, bribery or extortion are the two we're going to focus on. Extortion. What the hell is extorting? Hey, you going to do this for me, and if not, I won't do this. That's essentially what extortion is. So now let's go back to this racketeering statute. So you need racketeering activity or an unlawful debt. An unlawful debt is just saying, yo, I'm not going to give you this license unless you pay the debt that you owe me. You're like, wait, I don't owe you nothing. Yeah, it's an unlawful debt. So essentially, those you need either or racketeering activity or unlawful debt. The person has participated to use or invest directly or indirectly any part of such income in an enterprise which is engaged in activities that affect interstate commerce. So I should have highlighted that in red because now the other definition we need a definition for interstate commerce. And I just want to pull it up. There's interstate commerce, intrastate commerce, two different things. And then I'm gonna pull up an example because I think this is a really easy one to prove. Interstate commerce refers to commercial transactions or traffic that crosses state boundaries or involve more than one state. All right. So now we got the definition of what a RICO is and some of the definitions contained inside the statute. Any person who received income directly or indirectly from a pattern of racketeering activity, that means bribery, extortion, or through the collection of an unlawful debt. The person has participated to use or invest directly or indirectly any part of the income that they received in an enterprise or business which is engaged in activities that affect interstate commerce. That's across state lines. And that's very liberal. Interstate commerce is very liberal. Courts have found if I have a t-shirt business and I post it at the bottom, and I posted at the bottom of this YouTube video, here's the link to my merch. Courts have found that even though I operate out of wherever, Maryland, Virginia, wherever the hell I'm at, because it's online access, my business engages in interstate commerce because people from outside of my state can buy goods and services. And so interstate commerce is easy to prove. Most businesses have an impact with interstate commerce across state lines. Gas company. Well, what does a gas station have? Well, people get fuel and they travel. Automobiles affect interstate commerce. Planes affect interstate commerce. Food, yeah, food is transported from one state to another. It affects interstate commerce. If there's a web service, interstate commerce, state lines are being crossed to make transactions all the time. So now we're going to pull up a case where this is actually applicable to the super mayor. Let's go ahead and pull this up now that we know what the RICO is. And I got the comments over there. We're gonna jump into them, but I want to get to this while it's still fresh on your boy brain. And shout out, I can't remember who it was in the chat, the person who brought this up. Y'all can see what DFD like to look at. Shoes all on the screen. Yeezys on sale by the Adidas store, but I couldn't find my size. All right. It says Illinois mayor is now accused of shutting down. Illinois mayor is accused of shutting down local businesses, refusing to donate to her campaign, and blasting Rihanna's "Bitch Better Have My Money" at a board meeting. The first female mayor of a tiny Illinois village is now accused of shutting down businesses that refuse to donate to her campaign, just weeks after being slammed using city money to fund her glamorous looks. Dalton Mayor Tiffany Henyard, 40, is accused of using her official position within the town to retaliate against those who do not comply with her wishes, the New York Post revealed. Residents claims she adopts a persona of don't freeze on me. All right, let's see. It says residents claim she adopts a persona of movie gangster Nino Brown. She looked like a fool in that outfit. People look at politics like a joke, blah, blah, blah. Bitch better have my money. Is one part where the actual individual involved. Okay, here you go, right here. Here's the meat and potatoes. Now, remember what we defined RICO, racketeering, all of that shit. One resident, Lawrence Gardner, claimed that Henyard forced the closure of his trucking business after he refused to renew a $3,500 contribution to her political fund. Any person, Tiffany Henyard is a person, received income directly or indirectly. Let's see. I made the payment, he said. Then every year she started coming and required the same thing, and we had a problem about that. He made the payment. So element one is met. Tiffany Henyard, a terrible person, but she qualifies as a person. Element number two, received income directly or indirectly. This gentleman, Mr. Gardner, said, I made the payment, but she kept wanting the payment every year, and he had a problem with that. So she received income directly from a pattern of racketeering activity. Remember, racketeering activity involved bribery and extortion. This would qualify as extortion. If you don't do what the hell I say, you won't be able to operate your business. It's the same as me going in to a mom and pop shop and tearing up the damn place and saying, you need money from protection because these guys is crazy out here. So element one, person, met. Element two, received income directly or indirectly. It was directly, met. Element three, from a pattern of racketeering activity. Was met. Let's see. Element four, the person, Tiffany Henyard, had participated to use or invest directly or indirectly any part of such income. This gentleman said he gave $3,500. She participated to use it for what? What did she want to use it for? For her political campaign. That was the contribution. So element five, met. Last, in an enterprise which is engaged in activities that affect interstate commerce. The question is, the enterprise, what was the enterprise he gave the money for? Her political campaign. Do we think political campaigns of a mayor will impact interstate commerce across state line? I think the answer to that is absolutely yes. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. I think that's the I think that's the clearest and the most obvious indication for RICO, and I think that's one is easy. It says, "I made the payment." I'm gonna finish reading this. "I made the payment," he said. Then every year she started coming and requiring the same thing, and then we had a problem. Nino Brown, anything she wants done. Okay, what is she? Nino Brown? He said anything she wants done, she gets them to harass you. She likes nobody. If you're not doing what she says, if you are not doing how she's saying to do it, you're a problem and she don't like them. Residents and former officials accused Henyard and Police Chief Louis Lacey of obstructing local businesses that failed to make the required payments. Trustee Kiana Belcher agrees that former Police Chief Robert Collins admitted to being directed, by the mayor to target individuals. And then it talks about some of the other investigations that she is under. But I think that is the most obvious of all of these that jumped out. This one is probably the most serious. Well, wire fraud is serious too, but those two are definitely the more serious ones. And as soon as I read this, the first scenario that popped into my mind was her strong arming businesses to donate to her campaign or to donate to her charity. And that puts her right into this. Let me see. I want to make sure we got it up. Every element is met. Let's just go through this one more time. Element one, Tiffany Henyard meets the legal definition of a person, although a terrible person. Prong number two, the gentleman said he actually paid her, so she received direct income. That's met. Prong number 3 or 4. You don't need 3 and 4. You need 3 or 4. Prong number 3, it was from a pattern of racketeering activity, which, hey, she's strong arming these guys, is racketeering activity. Or 4 could be applied too. It's an unlawful debt. The guy says she circled back. She spun the block every year like, yo, you need to pay that debt. And the dude's like, I don't even owe you nothing. So 3 or 4 could be met. I think both of them are actually met in this situation. Person, receive income directly, racketeering activity, which is extortion. We read the definition. Or through the collection of an unlawful debt. The guy really had no debt obligation to keep his business running. Tiffany Henyard has participated to use or invest directly or indirectly any part of such income. If it goes to her campaign, it's an direct benefit. Actually, I would argue is a direct benefit to her. And the last one is in an enterprise which is engaged in activities that affect interstate commerce. Running for mayor, politics is going to affect interstate commerce. There's no way about it. There's no way around it. It's just something that happens. I don't think anyone would argue that me being the mayor of, let's say I'm the mayor of DC, hey, my job doesn't affect interstate commerce. Everything that you do affect interstate commerce. You know why? Because you control the tolls, the roads that connect the district to Virginia, that connect the district to Maryland. So I think she's a done deal on that one. The last one we're going to talk about, and I only did this one last because it's easy, but we're going to do this one last just because in the order that it happens, this is always the last one to happen. Damn, did I pass it? Oh, there you go. I'm tripping. Making false statements to federal agents. Okay. Now, this is going to be interesting. Okay. Normally, what happens is all of the crimes are committed. Every other crime we went through, honest services fraud, the RICO, conspiracy, everything else is done. But Tiffany Henyard has yet to speak with law enforcement. She hasn't spoken to law enforcement yet. At some point in time, she will speak to law enforcement. Now, it depends. There are 2 types of people, okay? 2 types of people, 2 types of defendants or accused, I would say, that you're going to deal with. Accused number 1 is the person who, when they understand the shitload of evidence against them, they just go in and be like, yo, I want to just cut a deal and work something out. Person number 2 is the type who they're going to try to give you their variation of the facts, and they're going to try to sell you on the bullshit that you've been saying that they've been saying for years. She strikes me as person number two. She just seems disingenuous. I don't think she's going to break down at the table talking to the feds and be like, "Ah, you got me. Okay, I capitulate. Let's work out a deal." Nah, at some point, I feel like she's going to have to talk to the feds. At some point, she's going to go in and talk to the feds. I would never go in and talk to the feds, but I would never go in and talk to the feds because I don't really care what the feds have to say. I just want to get the discovery. They're required to give me the discovery so I know all the evidence that they have against my client. I just want the discovery. I really don't want you going in there saying anything because Tiffany Henyard has a personality where she think, and I had clients like this, man, just put me on the stand and let me say what I need to say and I'll convince them. And I'm like, no, you're not going to convince them. You're actually going to say something to make shit worse. But she strikes me as one of those people who thinks that she could potentially be in front of law enforcement and show them how her version of the facts are the truth, not what they've seen and read and found out with their own ears and eyes. And when facing an audit or a federal investigation targeting any type of fraud, to include PPP fraud, individuals must be careful not to make false statements while also being cautious not to unnecessarily share information that could lead to federal prosecution. That's why generally I don't want my people talking to anybody if I'm a defense attorney. Under 18 USC 1001, making false statements to federal agents carries a fine of up to $250,000 for individuals, $500,000 for corporations, and 5 years of federal imprisonment.